Vulnerability isn't, okay, you cried in front of somebody or you got upset and you got really, you really showed how upset you were. Vulnerability is also like vulnerability in our communication.
I tried to be vulnerable sometimes with my friends, and I noticed even in those situations that sometimes opening up with like your guy friends was met with being mocked or like made fun of or being called like a wimp or something like that. I was just really like closed off, and it was hard to share with anybody.
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I am here today with our phenomenal co-host, Mike DiZio. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about vulnerability, but we're going to go deep into the topic itself. We're going to start by talking about how to actually be vulnerable with a fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant, the things that work and don't work. We're also going to discuss the myths around vulnerability, what people often think it is and what it isn't. And then we're going to discuss different ways of communicating around challenging moments or situations in a relationship with vulnerability to actually make the relationship work more functionally. We'll also include some tips and tools for how to help fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidants come out of their shell and be a little bit more vulnerable. And if you have questions about this topic, or if you want to see more topics like this, please let us know in the comments down below, because I think this is something that can't really be understated. And last but not least, we'll kind of talk about how vulnerability has affected different individuals culturally. And Mike will share some personal stories. So let's dive in. We are going to start with the topic. I'll let you kick it off, Mike.
Yeah, no, this is hits home for me big time because like being vulnerable before was like so hard. It was something that like I just straight up wouldn't do it. Like it would just be way too scary. And I guess I'll start out by saying like the experience in my generation when I grew up, like, boys didn't cry type thing. Like parents kind of, were like, come on, toughen up. And when you were crying, their main mission was to get you to stop crying as fast as possible. And sometimes like they would try to scare you into it, which is awful. Like, spank you into stop crying. Yeah. So then you learn at a young age, like emoting or crying or being vulnerable wasn't always met with a good result, right?
Well, not only is it not met with a good result, but it's actively met with a bad result, right? And that's a step further. And it's so interesting because you'll see that a lot of people who struggle with boundaries, it's like, okay, boundaries already aren't something that are acceptable growing up. That's one thing. But when people have big boundary issues because they actually got punished for having boundaries or saying no to their parents or attempting to have a boundary, those are the people who have the hardest time actually communicating their boundaries as adults. And it's almost like you're saying that that's something that you've seen in your childhood or experiences. And it's not just a bad result, or not just a not good result. It's like you actively are met with a negative result, a punishment for crying.
Exactly. And I can remember this, like one of my earliest memories was my Finnish grandfather, rest in peace, great man. But if you cried, he would literally like mock you and be like, cry baby. And it was like, oh, like you just felt terrible. It'd make you cry more, right?
Yeah.
And he just, I guess he thought you shouldn't be crying so much, like you're being a little baby, right? So then
interesting.
Later on, I think I tried to, be vulnerable sometimes with my friends or like see who I could kind of open up to. And I noticed even in those situations that sometimes opening up with like your guy friends was met with like being mocked or like made fun of or being called like a wimp or something like that. Wow. So literally like, even the times where I like, okay, I think I feel safe here, I can open up, but then got like mocked and made fun of and then was just like, okay, like I'm not doing this ever again. And then it went on to like relationships and I was just really like closed off and it was hard to share with anybody.
Out of curiosity, was there ever a time like at 8 years old or 10 years old, like do you remember there being a fundamental time where you're like, I'm going to close off now. I'm not going to even bother?
It's probably high school. I think high school kind of sticks out to me the most where I felt like I was like shamed and like made fun of. And I think high school is already like kind of sensitive about, being made fun of or criticized or anybody seeing that I was, different. So I think in high school, the times that I did, I got made fun of and I was like, this is not happening anymore.
Yeah. And it's so hard. And it's like you think back to, a healthy response from parents right at the beginning. It's like, well, your child is
Yeah.
crying for a reason.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't punish the child further for being upset. You should try to figure out what is upsetting the child and how to help solve for that or how to communicate about it. And
Right.
it's, hopefully something that's changing culturally today, but the impact of
Sure.
that is a pretty big deal long term.
Huge. Yeah. And yeah, just to put it to you, sort of as on the other side, as a female, were your parents sort of, when you cried, they were a little more like, oh, it's okay. Like, come on, tell me what's wrong. What's going on? Did you feel you were allowed to cry? Like it was kind of like encouraged or not like dissuaded or tried to make you stop crying? Like, what was your sort of experience?
I was like a super sensitive kid. So I remember growing up, I cried at everything, literally everything. And then I remember when I would get dropped off in kindergarten, every day I would cry. I
Yeah.
actually have this like really vivid memory of this kid in kindergarten with me being like, I started crying one day and he's like, there she goes again. And I like vividly remember being so mad at him that he was
Yeah.
like judging me, but I was so upset. Anyways, I cried at everything. And I think there was this point in time where I felt kind of like so sensitive and so walked all over. And I kind of realized like I had to toughen up. And I remember actually making a concerted effort to like be a little tougher and stronger as a kid. Like I remember around third grade being like, I have to learn to get angry.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in a way, I guess that was an adaptation to my environment and feeling kind of, and then I got into sports around that time or started playing sports a little bit more. And then as soon as you're an athlete, like you can't cry. And I played pretty competitively. And I remember also having this period of time as things got a little rougher in my family situation where I just
Mhm.
shut down. And I remember telling people there was a period of time where I didn't cry for like 5 years or something. And I remember
Mhm.
telling friends that when I was young, like I don't think I've cried for like 5 years.
Wow.
And for me, for how sensitive I am for now,
Yeah.
that was like wild to think about. And I think there was this part where like you're around situations, you're told not to cry, then you're around traumatic situations at home. And then I definitely just went through this like breaking point of like, I'm going to shut off, shut down, go cold. This
Mhm.
seemed to give me a sense of relief for a period of time. And I really did sort of stonewall. And honestly, one of the things that was so interesting as I started to heal and become more secure is I felt like my emotions turned back on. I remember having this really vivid moment. And I want to say I was like 22 years old. And I was sitting in my bed,
Mhm.
really upset about something. And normally I would like numb myself or avoid or, get really frustrated or angry. And I remember crying and it was almost like I was witnessing myself crying as I was crying and realizing like, oh, this is my body like resetting itself. This is how it's supposed to be. And I remember just feeling so much better after I cried. And then I did
Yeah.
some work on it, like, okay, here's what to do next because I was in my healing journey and sort of addressed it. But I remember thinking like, this is a good sign.
Yeah.
And since then, I'm blessed in the sense that I don't get like so triggered too often by things. But
Yeah.
if something happens, like when I found out my dog had cancer or things like that, like I just cry, like I just let it out,
Yeah.
I think it's a healthy way of processing, honestly.
Super healthy. And I know for DAs, super sensitive people, and I think they try to shut that down because they think they're going to be judged and made fun of, or people are going to be like, oh, what's wrong with you? But like, you need to let those things out. If they stay inside, like there's sort of a consequence to that.
Yeah.
And I heard the other day, actually, tears release cortisol as well.
No
So if you have
way.
built up cortisol,
Wild.
yeah, I should find like a study and like link it just so people don't think I'm
Wow.
making this up. But I did hear this the other day from somebody intelligent, and they did say it actually helps like release an excess of cortisol. So aside from that, there's just the whole like the release and just having something that's inside. It's obviously like if it's in you, it needs to come out. It needs to be expressed or felt or processed. Otherwise, you just keep sort of pushing things down over and over and over. And then again, you're hiding a part of yourself. And you just, I don't think you can be a happy person if you're not sort of showing who you are authentically. And if you're hiding parts of yourself that are sad, if you're hiding parts that are you're not happy with, like you're just going to sort of have them inside you, and it's just not going to feel good.
100%.
Yeah, we need to sort of embrace our sensitivity. Like you're a sensitive person. I for sure was a sensitive person, but we need to sort of like own that and embrace it. And the people that love us and care about us, they're not going to judge us if we're, having a moment where we cry a little bit. So, yeah.
And I also think there's something to be said for like in your closest relationships. Like if you're not able to show your true emotions to the people closest to you, you're almost like acting inauthentically in that relationship. You're almost like not bringing your truest self to the table. And so there's a lot of pain around that. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. I want to touch on something that you mentioned before we started recording, and it is the misconceptions that people often have about vulnerability. And I think that this is important because we're talking about like crying, things like that. And that's an important branch of vulnerability for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's sort of these two branches here. There's a part of like being able to show when you're sad or cry and reset and be in a healthy relationship to feel and to process your emotions. And we can talk even more about tools for how to do that later. But more than anything, vulnerability doesn't just end there. Vulnerability isn't, okay, you cried in front of somebody or you got upset and you got really, you really showed how upset you were. Vulnerability is also like vulnerability in our communication. And I think something that's so understated and is that we often, I can remember when I was fearful avoidant, for example, that to me, communicating a need was like terrifying because that was such a vulnerable thing. Even later into my healing journey, when I had done a lot of work and become dominantly secure, I still had to work on boundaries for quite a while after, because saying a boundary felt really vulnerable. Like, oh no, I'm going to disappoint somebody or I'm going to let them down. And that had a sense of vulnerability, like to show somebody my true self where my yeses and nos were. And vulnerability to let somebody know what hurts us, what affects us in a relationship doesn't have to be that you go cry every time about it. It can be that you open up and share things, and you can do that in a way that allows for the conversation to unfold healthily. So maybe if you want to go into for a second, just a bit of, what vulnerability is or isn't, but beyond, maybe we can talk a little bit about how to communicate vulnerably to fearful avoidance. I was a fearful avoidant, as many of you know. Mike was a dismissive avoidant, and how, when somebody is that attachment style, how that's best received.
Yeah, for sure. So you hit it on the head. Like some people think vulnerability means like, oh, I need to be like bawling my eyes out, or I need to be like really emotional and like dramatic and all this kind of thing. Well, if you say that to like a DA, they're just going to be like, no, thank you. Like, I'm not into that. But really, it's just like sharing something that's uncomfortable, that you're sort of afraid of what the result might be. Somebody might judge you. Somebody might laugh at you. Somebody might think you're weak. That was always a big one for me as well. But really, vulnerability is just sharing something that's inside of you that, you want someone else to know, that you want them to know about you. So you guys could either work on a problem or just to know you as a person. Like, how can you get to know your partner really well? Like, there's going to be a sort of only a certain distance you can get close together if you're only willing to share things that you think will be deemed as good enough or strong enough, or like you're only sharing the good things, and then you're hiding the bad things because you're thinking, if I were to share this, it's going to really turn off my partner and they might want to leave me, or think that I'm weak and not a strong man, which is the opposite, where we all know like the strongest people are the ones that can share and not like, this is their truth. They're standing in their truth. They're standing in their power. They're saying, I'm scared right now. This is something I'm afraid of. And that's just how I feel right now.
It's like courageous to be able to do that.
Super, super courageous. And I've given this example. I don't know if it was on our podcast or a while ago, but like I watch UFC a lot, Ultimate Fighting Championships. And these guys are like, they're warriors. They're like big macho fighting guys. They fight for a living. So they're super tough guys. And they're among some of the most emotional. Like sometimes at the press conferences after, they're sharing maybe a story about training or their family or whatever it may be. And they'll be crying. And no man on earth is going to look at one of these guys and be like, "Oh, what a wimp! What
right?
What a baby." Yeah. So I always just when I see that, I'm like, "Wow, that is so strong!" Like, there's an audience of probably like a million people watching them, but they're like, "This is how I feel right now, and I'm not going to be apologetic for it. Like, this is part of life." And then what's beautiful too is it gives other people permission to be like, "Oh, if that guy is tough and everybody looks up to him and he cries, and I can cry and share my emotions too." And it's true, like nobody should feel like they can't. And if you're around people that are shaming you or making you feel bad for that, then you might have to rethink.
Probably the wrong people to be spending your night with. Yeah, 100%. And also that shows a lot. Like if somebody can't handle anything at all around the emotional space, then like how's that person going to show up long term in a relationship in other areas? How's that person going to be when you go through something difficult or there's a big challenge? Like I think that we want to choose to bring people in our lives who are going to support us through those things.
Last thing, I just thought this was very important. If you are sort of, let's say your partner is dismissive avoidant and you know that they're not the most sort of emotionally literate and they might not be able to like totally hold the space for you. Not to say don't share vulnerable things with your avoidant partner. You definitely should. But vulnerability is usually best received in a way that's communicated without too much emotion. So when you're not like overly like crying or like overly emotional, you're just sort of letting them know like, "Hey, this is really hard for me right now. And I was hoping that you could just hear me out for a little bit or just validate, my emotions, or just sit there with me and just listen," like whatever it is that the person needs. But yeah, if your partner is avoiding, probably you don't want to be like super overly emotional. And
okay,
again,
so can we dive into this topic in a lot of detail? This is actually what I was going to say. So I think this will be one of the most important things that people are looking to hear in this podcast. So if you have an avoidant partner, and we'll do it for each attachment style, dismissive and fearful avoidant, how to approach them to share something vulnerable in a way that's going to get you heard. Here are some of the things that I see as the biggest blocks for dismissive avoidance through so many like client conversations I had over the years. Number one, if somebody feels like they're being emotionally dumped on. So dismissive avoidants don't take well if somebody keeps just saying, "Oh my gosh, my boss is this, my boss is that. I'm so frustrated. I'm so upset," but doesn't have like a practical outcome or isn't solution oriented. And especially if that process keeps repeating itself, I notice that dismissive avoidants sort of feel like, "Whoa, I'm helpless to do anything about this. I feel like you're making something my responsibility that's not." And they can sort of, retreat from that situation. The second thing is I find that dismissive avoidants don't, because they didn't have a lot of modeling for this, don't know that like, hey, if you're upset, to go give you a hug or to ask how they can be there or, these types of things. And so there's a lack of like expressing soothing, how to actually try to soothe the partner and help them co-regulate. Because if you've never really been co-regulated with much, then you're expected to do something that's just out of that comfort zone. And then the last thing is I find that dismissive avoidants get scared that they're going to do it wrong. And they also don't feel capable of like solving for it, or they're scared I'm going to say the wrong thing. And so can we just talk about like together for a second how to mitigate those blocks? So if somebody's listening right now and they're like, "Okay, my partner definitely struggles with these three things. They definitely are the type of person who they're scared of saying the wrong thing, so they don't say much at all." Or, what would be some ways to target those three areas?
Yeah, just the simplest way is just to ask someone like, "How can I best support you right now?" Or "What is it that I can help you?" Or "What is it you need right now that I can try and help you with?" And if you can help them, if they make and also that's, if it's something like above and beyond that you just absolutely can't, you have a right to ask them. The other person has the right to say, "I don't know if I can do this, but how about this?" Or "How about, somewhere in the middle." But just simply asking like, how would you like to be supported, or what's the best thing I can do for you right now? I remember when I first heard that, I was like, "Oh man, that makes me feel bad," because I should know intuitively, like, what's wrong with me? Like my girlfriend is suffering or struggling, and like I need to ask her what she needs. But no, like she's a totally different human being that came from a totally different background, and her needs in times of feeling upset are going to be way different maybe than what my needs are. So it's totally okay, and actually encouraged to say, what can I do for you right now? Or what is it that I can do to help you out right now? That's also two reasons that's amazing. Number one, you're giving them the option to literally tell you, I would just really need a hug right now. I just really need to be someone to listen to me right now. Because I grew up in a household where advice was default. Let me logically tell you what I think you should do with what you're coming to me with.
Yeah.
And if you're not looking for advice, you just need a little warmth. Yeah, you want a little warmth. You want a little soothing.
Yeah.
If somebody goes right in on advice, that can make you feel like doubly as bad as you felt before. So
can I say one thing quickly? I'm sorry to interrupt you. The other
No.
thing that I often would see dismissive avoidants do, Graham used to do this with me at the beginning. I had to talk to him about this. Is that I was like frustrated by something that I thought was like an injustice. Okay. So like, let's say that whatever, let's say somebody really cut me off while driving and it scared me.
Yeah.
I told him like, oh my gosh, this person really cut me off while driving.
Yeah.
And dismissive avoidants do this a lot. People probably have a good laugh at this. They often think that it's helpful to be the devil's advocate and be like, well, you've probably cut people off while you're driving too. It happens. And you're like, excuse me? That's not what I was looking for in the situation. And I've seen this with so many clients over the years too. And it's like that same kind of thing that you're talking about, like trying to solve the problem, trying to like lessen the problem for you by helping you see the other side. But a lot of times it's like in the moment you want somebody to be like, oh, that's not really nice. Okay. But that also happens sometimes. You can say it after, but like the validating the experience first goes a long way.
Yeah, that's why both sides, they really need to let each other know what they need in those moments. 'Cause he thought he was being helpful by offering you a different perspective where you'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, that's true. And then everything would be fine. But you wanted the opposite of that, right? So it ended up sort of frustrating you.
Yeah.
So, really, it's partly up to you to say, hey, like, I'm a little upset right now. Can you just, I don't know, talk to me or whatever it is you need.
I told him, I was like, hey, I know you're trying to just give me the other perspective. I'm happy to listen to the other perspective. And sometimes that is really helpful. But if I seem like I'm frustrated about something, can you just like acknowledge it first and say, oh, that's annoying. And here's this. And like solved it. Yeah. Fully clear after that.
This is the formula for the rest of our relationship going. Things happen. Seriously, like, you're giving them a little bit of a helper there. But
sorry, I interrupted you. You were talking about needs. No. So like it's so important for each side to tell what they need in a situation. And you were saying your family default is like was to go give advice. Like that was the default.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, people that do that, I still have to catch myself sometimes where I'm like, oh, I'm not sure this person needs advice right now.
Yeah.
So then I'll stop and ask them. But yeah, just know if you're the type to sort of the snap response is to give advice. Some people might rub some people the wrong way and they might not say anything. They might just sort of be like, okay, oh, thanks. You really helped me. And then hang up the phone. And they're just like, oh, like, because I stopped going to my parents sometimes for if I wasn't feeling good, because that's all they would do. That was like the only sort of way that they knew. And I know they love me and I know they care about me, but it just got to the point where I got really frustrated. I'm like, I'm not going to them anymore if I'm not feeling good.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't until later years that I had to explain to them and guide them and let them know, hey, like, I know you're trying to be helpful, but it's actually way more helpful if you just listen, or like, I don't want any advice whatsoever. I just want someone to sort of hear my perspective, hear my life experience. Yeah. So,
but good for you. Like that's so important because that's something that a lot of people just don't even do. And it's actually really painful to assume that people should just know, because then we're like, wait, but it's my parents and they should know that like, this is what I need. We often like feel a little bit personally slighted by the fact that somebody we care about so much or we're so close to giving us what we need in a difficult time. But that's the power of being able to fill in those blanks for somebody. Is like, even to this day, when I have a friend or somebody going through a hard time, I will more often than not be like, how can I best support you right now? Like you're going through a hard time. I don't expect myself to have the answers. I recognize everybody's so different. And that's just the best setting point to come from, is to be like, hey, what do you need? Because when you do that and you share that openly and you ask, you can't really go wrong.
Totally. And as the person who's asking like, how can I help you or whatever, that's such a nice gift that you're willing to show up and try whatever it is that they're needing. But also don't go over the line where you feel like, you have to take on their pain. You have to take on their whole issue. You can feel empathy for them. You can have a feeling of, oh, like that must be really hard. And, that would be really terrible to go through. But don't feel like you need to solve the problem or you need to be the one to sort of take it on and like, okay, instead of a one person problem now, it's like a 2-person problem. Because as you mentioned before, as a DA, that's like the nightmare where they're like, they don't want to like take on this big, huge emotional problem. They're like, oh my gosh, because they're kind of already thinking like, oh, that's a bit of a you problem. Like you should probably figure that out.
Yeah.
But as a partner, no, like you need to at least ask your partner, is there anything I can do to support you? And then give what you can.
And don't be afraid, if somebody's listening to this, don't be afraid to say, and you said this in passing earlier, but it's a really important point. Don't be afraid to say, like, let's say the person's like, I need you to stay at my house all week because I just need somebody here. Like, don't be afraid to say, hey, here's what I can do. And you don't have to stay at the house all week. Take yourself into consideration before making a commitment. People get scared that like, if I don't fully commit to whatever they request, the moment they say it, that, oh my gosh, they're going to be upset. No, if somebody's like, look, I can't stay all week, but I can stay extra this week. Here's the nights that I'll stay. I'll try to show up these extra 2 days. If you just show that you're willing to listen to the need and put your best foot forward and just try, I would see with clients over and over again, like 90% of the time plus, somebody's like over the moon. They're just so grateful that like you heard what they needed. You came part way. It doesn't mean come the full way all the time. People don't even expect that. Just knowing that you're trying to show up and be there and hearing them out is like huge.
Definitely, 100%. And then just want to touch on the importance of vulnerability as far as relationships go. Vulnerability is literally what turns infatuation into love. So you can imagine, like, if you don't know the person fully well, you're kind of creating some stories about someone. You don't fully know what's going on inside of them. You don't know their essence and what they've sort of been through and all that kind of stuff. So when somebody's vulnerably sharing about themselves, they let you into their internal world. And then you get to fall in love with the person, not like a sort of idealized version of the person, which that's what I used to hate like the most in past relationships, but it was my own fault. I didn't vulnerably open up and let them know a lot of my own inner thoughts and dreams and fears and all that kind of stuff. So they were left to sort of fill in the blanks. And I think they had these like expectations for me and they wanted me to be this kind of person. It seemed like they always wanted me to be someone different than what I was. But the thing is, they didn't really know who I was. Like they had to sort of fill in the blanks and create a bit of a story about me. And that was understandable, but I would just get so frustrated. Be like, oh, this person doesn't know me at all. And like, they don't understand me. Nobody understands me. I would be like, all emo. But I remember just thinking after a while, I was like, yeah, people don't understand you because you're not letting them in. Like you're not opening up. You're not sharing. You're only sharing the stuff that you think will be loved and accepted.
Yeah.
So of course you're setting yourself up for being misunderstood because you're not being yourself. So
I remember having this client and she was fearful avoidant and she was like absolutely beautiful, funny, great personality, successful at her job. And I met her for a first session and she said, one of my issues is I can't figure out why I keep going through these same relationship patterns. It's like I date somebody for a year and a half and then we just don't really progress. And then I'm like back to being single again. And she's like, this just happens my whole life. And I want to have kids and I want to settle down. And she was in her like maybe mid-30s at the time. And she's like, why does this keep happening? And like everything you could hope somebody has on paper, she had in flying colors, right? Like just all the societal, stereotypical sort of things.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I wonder what her challenge is. And as we started to go through and I learned about her relationship patterns, I was like, oh my goodness, she never lets anybody see anything vulnerable. And so people feel like they're like eventually trying to fall in love with this brick wall because she's not letting anybody in. She wasn't saying what would hurt her, what would affect her, what she needed. And so people would start feeling this sense of like emotional emptiness in the relationship. She kept having people say, hey, I feel like I can't like connect to you more deeply. I don't really know what's going on with you. And she said eventually people would sort of say things like that and soon after leave. And it really, like, I love that you said that, because infatuation's great. Long-term relationships do not last on infatuation. That's not it. And what they last on is like you being able to build deeper and deeper roots by opening yourself to somebody and working through things and knowing what upsets them and being mindful of it and supportive through those things, and vice versa. And when somebody is vulnerable, it's not just like, if you can go to a partner and say, hey, this is what comes up for me when this situation happens, and it really affects me, and can we do it this way in the future? Can we work on that? And the partner does and tries. We feel a sense of like safety. Oh, I can be myself with this person. I can share these things. And not only do we feel loved and receive love more for doing that, but somebody gets to know us more deeply. And I think one of the, not to go so far down the rabbit hole on this, but I think it's really important. Have you ever watched like movies or like a television show or whatever it is, and the characters you always fall in love with the most are the vulnerable ones, the people who are like, oh, and you really get on their side as a character, and you really, like, vulnerability allows us to, and it sounds so silly, but like, why do we love seeing little babies or little puppy dogs? Like, it pulls at our heartstrings because there's just this innate apparent vulnerability. And so it's like, the more that's a part of a relationship, that doesn't just allow you to receive love more, it allows people to fall in love with you more. And I'm saying that because I think there's so many people that need to hear that, like so many fearful avoidants that are always just on their best behavior, trying to be perfect, thinking that that's how they're going to be lovable long-term, or dismissive avoidants who are like, only show my good parts, don't be weak, don't be anything less than perfect. And it's like, that's actually going to be doing the very thing that you're afraid of happening to begin with.
That's so true. And it's very sad because, you could go a whole lifetime just trying to sort of appease everyone, but never really showing what's going on inside. And like you said, like it's the people who are authentic, and they're being authentic. You can tell they're speaking their truth and just saying what's going on in their mind. People love those kind of people, and they kind of look up to them like, oh, I wish I can do that. But you can do that. It's just exposure response, slowly but surely. Each time you're out with people, like, let a little more out, or just, for me, it was just be open to, like, if people laugh or make a joke or whatever, it's not the end of the world. Like, it doesn't mean they're, before I was like, oh, they think I'm weird or they're criticizing me or whatever. But no, maybe just on that narrow point or that narrow comment that you made, like, they think it's kind of weird or doesn't make sense, like whatever viewpoint you had on something. But that's the end of that. Doesn't mean they're like, okay, that's it, I don't want to be friends with this person anymore.
Yeah, or if somebody's rude or disrespectful in any way, when you do share something vulnerable and it doesn't feel good for you, then it's like, that's a vetting tool. Like, okay, that wasn't the best response. Maybe, like, I should invest in other friendships more, where I can speak about myself, where I can really share and connect. And so it can be like a vetting tool, 100%. The start of a new year always feels like a fresh start, a chance to set goals, get organized, and focus on what really matters. And for a lot of you, financial wellness is at the very top of that list. But let's be honest, keeping track of every single subscription, bill, and expense can feel really overwhelming at times, especially when life is fast-paced. And that's where Rocket Money can be such a game changer. Everything is finally in one place, and you can save money without the stress. Rocket Money is a personal finance app designed to support you every step of the way. It helps you find and cancel any unwanted subscriptions, keep an eye on spending, and even works to lower your bills so that you can feel more confident about your financial future. With Rocket Money, everything is easy and clear to understand. You'll see all of your subscriptions in one place so you know exactly where your money is going. And if there's something you no longer need, Rocket Money makes canceling it very quick and hassle-free. Their dashboard also gives you a crystal clear view of your expenses across every single account that you have. You can set a personalized budget, track your spending habits, and get alerts if something needs your attention, like an unexpected charge, or even if you're nearing your budget limit. And the best part is that Rocket Money will even step in and negotiate lower bills on your behalf. No endless hold music, no frustrating phone calls. It's actually all handled for you. With over 5 million users and over 500 million saved and canceled subscriptions, Rocket Money isn't just an app. It's a partner on your financial journey. Members save an average of $740 a year using Rocket Money's premium features. So if you want to take a step towards financial clarity and peace of mind today with Rocket Money, you can head to rocketmoney.com/Thais. rocketmoney.com/THAIS.
I have a question. These days, we're in times now where things are pretty polarizing. And it seems like, even though when I was younger, I never remembered like families breaking apart because of like political views or views on medical stuff and stuff like that. Where do you think you should draw the line at like opening up when it's a topic that's pretty polarizing and pretty emotional for most people? Is that something where you're like, I sort of know where my friend or my coworker stands on things and it's the opposite where I do? Should we just be open in every other area but not go there? Or should we go there and see how we can have mutual respect and hear each other out? We might not agree with each other totally, but at least let's test our friendship to see if we can still love and care about each other in spite of having opposite views.
The way I think of it is like, what do you want the outcome to be? And it's like, you want the outcome to be like, well, doesn't everybody right now want the outcome to be that like you could go back circa 10 years ago where you could just have a different political opinion and just talk about it and it didn't affect anything, and it didn't affect like your viewpoint or your friendship or these things. And it's sad that we got there, but like only we can undo that. And so to me, it's like, if people, want to have a conversation, well, if anybody comes to me with really charged views on anything, I'll just be like, hey, cool, like talk about it. Like, I just,
they're going to say like, put the brakes, like, hey, you're coming at this a little too.
No, I just try to make it normal. If I disagree with something, I try to normalize disagreeing. Like, hey, it's okay that we disagree on this. It's not a big deal. And I even say things like that to people sometimes. Think of 10 years ago when this was okay to have different viewpoints and to disagree. And like, we don't have to agree on everything. We need to still treat somebody with like respect and kindness and compassion. And I think if people did that in the world, I think one of the biggest tragedies that came out of so much of the last few years was the fact that like, when you have a different viewpoint. So I was on a meeting this morning, and there was 5 of us on the meeting, and we were talking about, I was working on this project, and one person like didn't really show up very well on the project, left kind of abruptly. And we were deciding like what we wanted to do with some of what happened there. And I was very like, it's cool, like very like forgiving and just like let it go. And I had a person on that meeting who was a friend of mine and who was like, no, we have to be very strong and stern and, really intense about it. And I just respect like, okay, she feels differently about the situation. And we just talked it out. And, here's why I think this. Why do you think this? And I think if you're just patient and open and you really talk from like a regulated space, where we came to at the end of it was something where I got to learn from her opinion and I got to consider things I didn't consider before, because I listened to her and she came and met me really healthily and was like, oh, I see your thing too. And we ended up in the middle with a way better approach to address the situation than we would have if we hadn't like just heard each other out. And I think that there's tremendous benefit in when you're polarized in a viewpoint or a topic to hear each other out, because you might realize, whoa, I just learned something from here and this person learned something from here. But I think the tragedy is that we lost that. And that only happens if we like choose to go back to behaving that way individually, because each of those individuals makes up the collective. So that's my philosophical stance on that. But like, that's you. And to say like, hey, I see your point, or I see why you would think like that too. And I get that. I get where you're coming from. Here's sometimes what I think in this situation, and here's where I stand and why. And if somebody can't have a conversation back with you in a healthy way, that's fine. You don't have to engage with somebody if they're going to berate you or something unhealthy. But like, maybe people should give it a shot a little bit. I do that in personal conversations if and when I can.
Yeah. I like when you said, like, what do you want the result to be? Right away, what popped in my head is I think some people, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is you want to be right. You want to let them know you're wrong in what you're thinking, and I'm right, and I need to really push this and keep on showing you until you join my side, But really, like, no one wants to feel like they're being, okay, like, you're totally wrong. Like, you're making the other person feel like they're just completely like lunatic and like, how could they believe that kind of thing? But really, we should be striving for let me understand more why you think that, and I'll let me explain to you why I think the way that I do. And just consider the other person's where they stand, and it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm right, you're wrong. It's just like, hey, let's collect some more information here and find out why you believe what you do. Because there's a reason why they believe that. There's something that, they believe, some information they've collected or something that's happened to them in their lives. Like, you're going to find out more about that person. But I just think don't try to you can be vulnerable and open up, but don't do it for the mission of trying to I need to educate you because you're totally wrong right now.
Yeah.
That's not going to get
anywhere. And I think the outcome should be, in a perfect world, that you can just have a different viewpoint sometimes, and that's okay. And we can respect each other's boundaries around different viewpoints. We can be like, okay, this person feels this way, and I'm not going to try to pressure them to change. If they want to talk, I'm open to talking or open to sharing, things that might be helpful. Maybe I'll learn something that's helpful to me from them too. It's too bad that maybe we're going back there a little bit slowly but surely. Maybe we're evolving back to a space where we can be more neutral with conversations and communication.
For sure. I think some of the powers that be are throwing some gas on these situations and making us sort of fight. Anyway, we could talk about this for 5 hours, that's for sure. So yeah, back to vulnerability and opening up. Just a few tips for someone who's afraid of sort of sharing their inner world with people. Just saying a few words before what you're about to share, I feel can sort of lessen the anxiety, because then the other person knows oh shoot, this it really means a lot to this person, or this person's going to share something that's actually hard for them to share. Saying things like, I'm feeling afraid right now and I just wanted to share something with you. Trust me, you're going to get your partner's attention, especially if you're avoidant, you're sharing this with your partner. Things like, I want you to know something about me that, I'm a little bit scared to share. I'm a little ashamed or worried that you're going to think that I'm weak or weird or whatever it is, whatever you're feeling insecure about. You can kind of lead with what you're about to say is a little bit hard and is not something that you share easily with people. And your partner, trust me, will be wow, this is such a gift. This person's opening up. And to you, it might not feel like something, they're sharing something whoa, earth shattering, but to them, it's scary. And they maybe haven't opened up to anybody about it. So if you sort of create an environment where if somebody is telling you something that you can see they're sort of struggling with, just encourage them. It's okay. You can share with me, and there's no judgment here. Let me know what's going on for you. And the more you can kind of create that container, I guess they call it, safe container, you're going to have people opening up more. And all that does is just keeps moving you closer and closer together. So.
And I think too, if you're somebody who's sharing with a dismissive avoidance, so sort of flipping it around, letting them know the same thing. Hey, this is a little vulnerable for me. Dismissive avoidance, people have this theory or belief that oh, they never take well to vulnerability. That couldn't be further from the truth. If you can communicate in a fairly neutral tone and say, look, this is what's showing up for me. Here's, what I'm needing for support. And you tell them specifically what you're needing, even if they don't ask, if they don't know how to ask just yet, just saying, hey, I'm feeling a little, concerned about the situation or a little vulnerable about the situation. Here's what I'm needing to go forward in this situation. It would really help me if you could ABC. And speaking that from a neutral tone, that is vulnerability where it's okay, this is all you need. Now I feel like I'm capable because you told me what you need and I can sort of fit in there. I'm not scared. I'm not going to say or do the right thing. You told me that you're vulnerable, but I don't feel like it's coming from a space of emotionally dumping. And so that's where dismissive avoidants really step up to the plate. And to flip it around, just like you said, as a dismissive avoidant, if you're sharing and you're saying, hey, this is what's coming up for me, don't be afraid to also say, be gentle, or can you give a little kindness or grace to the situation? If you're scared, I see people do this in our Facebook group sometimes. They will say in advance, hey, I'm going through this situation. It's a hard situation. I'm a little, nervous, or it's vulnerable to share this. Can, please be kind and compassionate in your responses. That's a great communication skill because you're letting people know ahead of time, or even I've seen people say, hey, I want advice about this and this, but not this and this. And, just being able to lead with that and communicate that way allows you to have the most promising outcomes because you're clear. You know what you're needing in the situation. And when you convey that, your batting average, your success rate of having the outcome you're looking for increases dramatically.
Yeah, I love that. And just to your point, like you also have to know what you need in this situation. So don't just go in blind and then expect the other person should know exactly what you need. Like you're gonna have to sort of know what you need the most and then share it. And I love how you flip the other side where if you're telling a DA something that's vulnerable for you, it is good to say that what you're sharing is actually a little tough or you feel a little shy or worried that you're going to be judged because the DA might think like, anything you're sharing is probably easy for you. Like it seems like, because anyone I've dated in the past, I always think like they're such good communicators. Like they share so much stuff and they open up so easily. But some of the things they're opening up with is not always that easy, but they do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, like you said, it is very important to share to an avoidant person, like, hey, like what I'm sharing right now is a little vulnerable or a little scary. Like after I share, like, could you give me a hug or whatever it is that you need? Yeah. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to talk about was no, just how in general this brings relationships closer together. Like these are the things that make breakthroughs in relationships. I've had relationships where it was like surface, 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 and then all of a sudden you have this like deep, meaningful, vulnerable conversation where you get to learn so much about each other, and it literally feels like you leveled up.
Yeah.
Just because of like one like conversation. Have you ever had that before
Oh
too?
my gosh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like amazing. And it gives so much confidence for like the future to be like, hey, like, wow, we really opened up there. And not only did the person not judge me or make me feel less than or whatever, they were so supportive and made me feel amazing. So of course you're going to want to, the next time you're thinking about sharing, it's going to be so much easier, right?
So much easier. And to your point, one of the biggest things that happens, and it goes through the different stages of relationships and dating, is in the dating stage, we're supposed to start being pretty vulnerable, but you're not going to sit down and tell somebody all of your life story. And the first time you meet them, you slowly get to know somebody, you vet them, you see how their responses are, ask more questions. Then you go into the honeymoon stage, you've made a commitment. Then you get into the power struggle stage. The way to make it out of the power struggle stage is to literally have these types of conversations, to learn what somebody's fears are and to be able to be considerate of them. So for example, if you're dating somebody and they're afraid of being criticized or they're sensitive to that, be a little more mindful in your delivery. It doesn't mean change everything about yourself as a person. It just means be respectful. That's a soft spot for them. You're going to look out for them and have their back around that, and be thoughtful around how you communicate, and vice versa. If somebody's like, if the other person, they have a sensitivity towards whatever it might be, a lack of consistent communication, then that person, okay, try, you don't have to be perfect, make the effort to come a little bit further. What ends up happening in the power struggle stage that eventually gets you out is when you can consider each other's viewpoints, remind each other sometimes if you fall off, see your needs through, normalize that kind of communication. It goes from something you have to talk about originally that feels like effort into something you don't have to talk about because you've talked about it enough and you know it. And then you just naturally consider each other, and that naturally comes up. And that is actually the rite of passage for moving out of the power struggle stage into the stability, commitment, and bliss stages, is these things that each other are sensitive about. You already know, you already look out for each other around them. You don't even have to say it anymore. And it feels like that heavy lifting of first having to communicate and learn those things is actually really simple and light and easy after that.
Well, that's amazing. So in the early stages, honeymoon and dating stage, are some people sort of just internalizing these small little things that might bother them, or if they notice their partner does a certain thing and doesn't make them feel great, do they feel like, oh, it's not appropriate yet to sort of really get vulnerable and open up about that?
A lot of people do. I think there's a couple things happening at once. A lot of secure people talk early. They'll say, oh, hey, can you be mindful? 100%. That's the best approach for sure. But there's that we have a little bit of rose-colored glasses on. We actually have like elevated neurochemicals around oxytocin and phenylethylamine, like the attraction neurochemical, the bonding neurochemical. So there are things that we're going to kind of filter out a little more easily.
Yeah.
So earlier on, we haven't necessarily let somebody in to hurt us quite as much, right? Like if we've really let somebody in and we're really feeling like we've deeply connected or committed, somebody has a little more power to hurt us. So you're sort of seeing like that needle start to move. Like as time goes on, okay, the rose-colored glasses come off a little bit, But on
Mm.
top of that, I've given my heart to somebody and now they could affect me more. And that's where, like, when we feel more affected by those individuals, that's where it's like time to really plug into that work of communication.
That makes sense. So much sense.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to mention too is, like, if you feel like you're the vulnerable leader in the relationship, like, don't give up on someone who's you can tell it's sort of hard for them to share.
Mhm.
So I'm saying this, I had a partner once who was like really good with like initiating sort of tough conversations. It's stuff that we both knew that we needed to like talk about. And for them, they needed it for clarity and they were up for doing it. But for me, it was like so vulnerable. I was worried about saying the wrong thing. I was worried about upsetting them. But they created such a safe environment where it was like, no matter what I shared, what was going on inside of me, like, would trump anything I could say that would make them like really upset and want to, like, punch me or scream at me or, hate me for life. So just know, like, there's a way as well to sort of create that space where it's like, I might not love what you have to say, but you sharing with me what's going on inside you is, I would like that way, way more than you hiding something that you think might hurt my feelings or might like make me a little upset for a few days. So I just
100%.
wanted to share that as well for anybody who resonates with.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think there's like this part where it's like somebody comes and they share, and I've seen people, unfortunately, over the years, and it's kind of tragic because they're like, I want my partner to tell me things, but then the partner tells them something and their first response is to give it a really hard time. And then you get locked in this catch-22 because it's like, well, you want the person to share, but you're not helping co-create an environment where that's possible. And of course, like, that takes both people. The person has to be willing to eventually open up more and do the work to share, and that's their work. But the other person, if that's what you're yearning for and you want that closeness, you have to be able to make it okay for that person to do so if it's difficult. And so there's that co-creating of that experience that goes both ways. It's so important.
Super important. Yeah, we're the turtle in the shell. Like, if you give a bad reaction, we're just going back in the shell and probably not sharing for a while. So be
Definitely
really delicate. Yeah, just know everybody knows this, or maybe you don't. DAs are so sensitive. Like, we're so sensitive. You wouldn't know it because we seem pretty calm, collected. Yeah, but like there's such a sensitive little kid inside DAs. So just know, once you do get sort of start to understand them and get to know them more vulnerably, you'll see that they're pretty darn sensitive, and you just have to really tread lightly. So
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is awesome. This was such a great episode. Thank you so much for all of your sharing. Thank you for everybody listening, stopping in, tuning in. If you have more questions about this, or you want to see more content about this as a whole, let us know in the comments down below. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can listen on audio. If you want to listen to any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, we are there. If you're driving to work or on your way home and want company. And if you're listening on there, you can also watch the full video version on YouTube as well. I will put Mike's social media stuff down below as well, and information down below. Sorry, Kaya, let me say that properly. I'm also putting Mike's social media information down below if you want to learn more about Mike. And if you want to join any of our personal development school courses for free for a limited time, there's a link down there too. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you. See you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth. And thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.